Who let this kid into my academy?
There is a moment just before everything changes, when the world goes completely still, when a room full of people holds its breath, when one person stands alone in front of a crowd that has already decided he doesn't belong. Caleb Reyes had lived his entire life preparing for a moment he didn't know was coming. 20 years old, no family name, no connections, raised across 7 foster homes, passed from address to address like something temporary, something the system hadn't figured out what to do with yet. And on an ordinary Tuesday morning in October, he walked into a federal law enforcement drill hall, took his seat in the back row, and had no idea that the man standing at the front of that room had stolen something from his family 30 years ago. He had no idea that the scenario he was about to be handed had already been solved by his father before Caleb was ever born, and he had no idea that 4 minutes and 11 seconds were about to undo 30 years of lies. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Commander Voss's voice cracked across the drill hall like a rifle shot. 31 years of service, 3 commendations, untouchable. You, back row, the mixed one, stand up. Caleb Reyes rose, 20 years old, silent. Look at this, foster kid, no family name, no connections, no legacy. Tell me, Art, did some diversity checkbox get you through that door? Because I've seen your type. Soft background, no discipline, a no pedigree. You don't last a week in my program. He crossed the floor slowly, boots striking concrete like a judge's gavel. I'm going to give you a scenario. It has broken senior cadets. It has made decorated officers walk out of this room. And you, group home trash, you're going to show me exactly why kids like you don't belong in federal law enforcement. He stopped 3 feet away. Solve it, or pack your locker tonight. What Commander Voss did next would cost him everything. His career, his reputation, his deepest secret. Now let me tell you who Caleb Reyes really was, because Commander Raymond Voss had been standing at the front of that drill hall for 9 years, and in all that time, not a single cadet had ever made him afraid. Not one. He had dismissed the fearful ones, the underprepared ones, the ones who crumbled under pressure, and every single one of the ones he had quietly decided didn't belong the moment they walked through the door. He was very good at making people disappear. He had been doing it for 30 years. But on that Tuesday morning in October, Commander Voss looked at the young man in the back row and saw exactly what he always saw, a target. What he did not see, what he could not have imagined, was that Caleb Reyes had been waiting for this moment since he was 14 years old. Not this specific moment, not this room, not this man, but the moment when someone powerful would look at him and say you don't belong, and Caleb would have to decide what he was made of. Caleb had made that decision a long time ago. He just hadn't had the chance to prove it yet. He was 20 years old, now a second-year cadet at the Whitfield Federal Law Enforcement Academy, the youngest in his cohort by 2 full years. Every morning he arrived before the others. Every evening he stayed after them. He sat in the back of every classroom in the same corner, in the chair closest to the exit, the kind of seat you choose when you've spent your whole life knowing that sometimes you need to be able to leave quickly. He never raised his hand, never volunteered answers, never allowed anyone to see the full shape of what he knew. His evaluations were solid, consistent, unremarkable. B-level performance across the board, strong enough to maintain his scholarship, careful enough to stay invisible. That was intentional. Caleb had learned very early that being seen came with a price, and he had learned it the hard way. Yes, in the group homes where he grew up, being too smart was dangerous. It made you a target for the kids who resented it and an inconvenience for the adults who didn't know what to do with it. In the schools he rotated through, 6 different schools across 4 counties before he turned 16. Being the new kid who knew all the answers made the teachers uncomfortable and the other students hostile. So he learned to hold back, to give enough to pass, never enough to threaten, to keep his real abilities private, saved for himself, stored away for a time when they might actually matter. What nobody at Whitfield Academy knew What none of his instructors, his cohort members, or the scholarship committee that had admitted him could have guessed was that Caleb Reyes had been studying federal law enforcement strategy, crisis psychology, and command theory since he was 14 years old. Not because a teacher had encouraged him, not because a mentor had guided him, but because of a cardboard box he had found in a bedroom at the third foster home he ever lived in. The box had been left behind by a former resident, a young man who had aged out of the foster system years earlier and had simply never come back to collect his things. Inside were federal training manuals, law enforcement procedure guides, tactical case study briefs, and a set of handwritten notes that Caleb couldn't stop reading. The notes were dense and detailed, the handwriting tight and careful, filled with analysis and cross-referenced observations and margin comments that turned what might have been dry procedural text into something that felt almost alive. Caleb read through that box in 3 days. Then he read it again. Then he started taking notes of his own, comparing, questioning, expanding. He was 14 years old, sleeping in a twin bed in a house that was not his, in a room that would belong to someone else in 6 months, and he was teaching himself federal command theory from a stranger's abandoned study materials. By 16, he wasn't just reading the materials. He was improving on them, identifying gaps, writing out his own analysis of scenarios the original notes had only partially addressed. By 18, he had quietly absorbed more practical command knowledge than most academy graduates possessed after 2 full years of formal training. By the time he arrived at Whitfield on a scholarship and sat down in the back row of Commander Voss's drill hall, Caleb Reyes was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most tactically gifted minds in that building. Nobody knew. He had made very sure of that. And the reason he had stayed hidden for 2 full years, the reason he had kept his scores average and his profile low, was the same reason his father had once tried to protect himself the same way and failed. He just didn't know that yet. Now let me tell you about Commander Raymond Voss, because understanding what happened in that drill hall requires understanding the kind of man who ran it. Voss was 56 years old, and he had spent every one of those years constructing a version of himself that the world would find impossible to challenge. 31 years of federal service, 9 years as department chair at Whitfield, published in 3 law enforcement journals, invited to testify before congressional committees twice. His walls were covered in the physical evidence of a life spent accumulating authority, and he wore it all with the ease of a man who had never seriously been questioned. Cadets called his command course the graveyard, not because people failed, though they did often, but because of what Voss did to them before the failure was official. He had a particular method. He would identify, early in each cohort, the cadets he had decided didn't belong, not based on performance, not based on ability, based on something else entirely, something he never named out loud, but that everyone in the building understood. Then he would create a public moment, a scenario, a question, a challenge, something designed to humiliate in front of witnesses, to plant the seed of self-doubt so deep that the cadet would water it themselves until it grew into withdrawal, transfer, or quiet disappearance. He had been doing it for 9 years at Whitfield. He had been doing it in different forms for 30 years before that, and it had always worked. There had been 4 formal complaints filed against Voss in his 9 years as department chair. 4 cadets, every one of them a minority, every one of them without family connections inside the department, who had put in writing that Voss had targeted them, isolated them, and systematically undermined their ability to continue. All 4 complaints had been dismissed. Insufficient evidence, the Oversight Office had written each time. Voss had friends in the federal oversight structure. Serious friends. The kind who could look at a formal complaint and decide before reading it fully that it wasn't going anywhere. He had built those relationships carefully over 30 years, and they had protected him every time he needed protection. He believed, with the deep certainty of a man who has never been held accountable, that they always would. He had no idea that this belief was about to cost him everything. And there was something else, something that Voss had been carrying for 30 years like a stone in his chest. A secret that had started small back in 1993 when he was a senior training commander and a young cadet had brought him something extraordinary. a secret that he had buried under commendations and publications and congressional testimonies and 9 years of institutional authority. A secret that had a name, and that name was Marcus Reyes, Caleb's father. Voss had not thought about Marcus Reyes in years. He had trained himself not to. He had built enough distance between himself and 1993 that the memory had gone from a sharp, specific guilt to something dull and abstract. The kind of thing you can almost convince yourself didn't happen the way it happened. Almost. But on that Tuesday morning in October, when he looked at the young man in the back row and asked his name and heard Reyes, something moved in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself it was a coincidence. He told himself the boy in the back row was nothing like his father, and there was no reason to be concerned. He was wrong about all three. October 3rd, 0900 hours. Drill Hall B at the Whitfield Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Caleb had walked into that room the same way he walked into every room. Early, quiet, head slightly down, bag over one shoulder, eyes taking in the space without appearing to. He had noted the positions of the other cadets as they filed in. He had noted the energy in the room the moment he sat down, the particular tightness in the air that told him something was different about this session. He had noticed Commander Voss standing at the front before the room was even half full, which Voss never did. He always entered after his cadets, a dominance move that Caleb had cataloged in his first week. Voss standing there waiting meant Voss had already decided something before the session started. That was important information. Caleb filed it away and kept his eyes on the desk in front of him. 40 other cadets settled into their seats around him, mostly older, mostly from backgrounds that gave them a certain ease in institutional spaces. Families with officers in the department, fathers who had walked these same halls, uncles who could make a call if something went sideways. Caleb had none of that. He had a scholarship, a weekend job at a logistics warehouse, and a box of materials he had carried from the third foster home that had ever housed him. Voss let the silence build for a moment before he spoke. That was also a technique. Let the quiet get heavy enough that when your voice comes, it feels like relief. Caleb had read about that in a behavioral command manual when he was 15. "Good morning," Voss said. And then he told the room about the scenario. An automatic advanced standing guarantee for anyone who could walk through it correctly. The highest possible performance marks for the quarter. No further evaluation required. Voss had never offered anything like this before. Caleb knew that. The room knew that. The offer was designed to tempt, and the temptation was designed to identify who was hungry enough to step forward. And the condition? Fail, and you drop a full evaluation tier, immediately, no appeal, was designed to make sure the person who stepped forward had enough to lose that the humiliation would be complete. Voss scanned the room. His eyes moved from face to face with the slow deliberateness of a man who already knew where they were going to land. And they landed. Now, as Caleb had known they would the moment Voss started talking, on the back row, on the far corner, on the one face in the room that Voss had already decided didn't belong. "Reyes," Voss said. Caleb felt the word land in his stomach the way a stone hits water, not loudly, but with a weight that spreads outward. "Sir," he said. "You've been very quiet this term," Voss said. "Sitting back there, doing just enough, almost like you're hiding something." He tilted his head slightly. "Stand up." Caleb stood. "Come to the front." He walked. Every step across that drill hall floor felt like a decision. He could feel 40 pairs of eyes tracking him. He could feel the particular quality of attention that a crowd gives to someone they expect to fail. Not hostile exactly, but hungry, the way people get when they sense a spectacle coming. He reached the front of the room and Voss handed him the scenario brief, and their fingers touched for a moment, and Voss's hand was cold in the way that people who have held power for a very long time sometimes go cold. Not from temperature, but from something that has hardened inside them. Voss leaned close, voice dropping below the hearing of the room. "Between you and me," he said quietly, "I don't think you last 30 seconds. Then loudly for the cadets. 5 minutes, Reyes. Walk us through it. Impress me. Or clean out your locker this afternoon." Caleb looked down at the brief in his hands, and something happened that he had not expected. Not fear, not the adrenaline of performance pressure. Something quieter than that and more powerful. Recognition. He had seen this scenario before, not in a Whitfield textbook, not in any published training material. In a set of handwritten notes, careful and dense, from the box he had carried since he was 14 years old. The notes had a title across the top of the first page, The Callaway Protocol, Proposed Solution, Field Tested in Simulation. And in the margin, in the same tight handwriting, 3 words, Command Sequence Confirmed. Caleb knew the solution. He had known it for 6 years. He had read it so many times that he could have written it out in the dark, from memory, without a single error. The man who had written those notes had already solved this scenario, had solved it completely, elegantly, in a way that federal analysts had been debating and disputing for 30 years without reaching consensus. And that man had done it before Caleb was born. Not before Commander Voss had ever claimed the credit. Caleb raised his eyes from the brief. "I'm ready," he said. Voss laughed, short, dismissive, the laugh of a man performing confidence for an audience. "Then proceed. Show us what a foster kid knows about command decisions." Caleb began to speak. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He walked through the scenario the way the notes had laid it out, starting from the first variable, building through each decision node with a logic that was airtight and a precision that was uncommon. His approach was unconventional. Nothing like the standard Whitfield methodology, nothing like anything Voss had ever published or taught. It couldn't have come from the curriculum because it hadn't. It came from handwritten pages that only one person outside of the man who had written them had ever read. Around the 2-minute mark, something changed in the room. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself but that you can feel. A shift in attention, a collective leaning forward, the specific quality of silence that falls when people realize they are watching something they didn't expect. Cadets who had been waiting for the humiliation were now watching something else entirely. Voss's expression had changed too. The smirk had gone first, then the color in his face. He was watching Caleb the way a man watches something he had thought he destroyed come back through the door. 4 minutes and 11 seconds after he began, Caleb set the brief down on the table beside him and turned around. "Done," he said. The drill hall was completely silent. Voss stared at the floor diagram Caleb had mapped out. His eyes moved across the command sequence, checking it, rechecking it, looking for an error he could use. There wasn't one. The solution was complete, correct, and so far beyond what any second-year cadet should have been able to produce that there was no version of this moment that didn't require an explanation. One cadet started clapping, then another. Then the sound spread before Voss could stop it. "Stop," Voss said, and the authority in his voice killed the applause immediately. But the damage was already done. 40 witnesses, an impossible scenario solved in 4 minutes and 11 seconds by a 20-year-old foster kid from the back row. Voss turned to face Caleb. His voice was controlled, but his hands were not. "Where did you learn that method?" "My father taught me." The shift that moved across Voss's face in that moment was not surprise. It was recognition. It was fear. It was the expression of a man hearing the name of something he had buried and believed was gone forever. He recovered in under 2 seconds. Impressive for a man who had just had the floor pulled from beneath 30 years of careful construction. "What is your father's name?" "Marcus Reyes," Caleb said. "He died when I was 3. Voss said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, "Class dismissed. Everyone out. Now." Word moved through the Whitfield Academy the way fire moves through dry grass. By the time the lunch hour came, the story had already grown beyond what had actually happened, which was extraordinary enough on its own, into something larger, a myth in real time. Yet a scholarship cadet with no connections had walked Voss's impossible scenario in 4 minutes flat, had made the department chair go white in front of his own cohort, had done it with a method that nobody recognized from any textbook currently in use. People who had never set foot in Drill Hall B had opinions. Second and third year cadets were discussing it in corridors and mess halls with the energy of people who had been waiting for something like this without knowing they were waiting. Caleb wanted nothing to do with any of it. He went back to his room that evening, locked the door, pulled the blinds, and sat in the quiet with the box that had come with him from foster placement to foster placement, and now sat in the corner of his dorm room like a permanent fixture of his life. He opened the oldest notebook. The cover was worn soft at the edges. The first page read, M. Reyes, Federal Academy, class of 1993. His father had studied here, at this building, in this department, 27 years before Caleb arrived. And the man who had been standing at the front of Drill Hall B this morning, the man whose face had cracked open for 2 seconds when he heard the name Marcus Reyes, had been here too. That was not a coincidence. Caleb didn't know yet exactly what it meant, but he knew it wasn't a coincidence. He sat with his father's notes in his lap and thought about the look on Voss's face. Not surprise, recognition. The specific expression of a man who thought something was over and has just discovered it isn't. The email came 2 days later at 3:47 in the afternoon. Subject line, Academic Integrity, Mandatory Review. Report to Commander Voss's office at 1600 hours. Caleb read it 3 times. Each reading landed harder than the last. Academic integrity. Those 2 words in that combination, in the context of a federal law enforcement academy, meant one thing, cheating, and cheating meant dismissal. Permanent dismissal, transcript notation, scholarship revocation, and every door inside federal service closed before he had ever walked through a single one. He had come from nothing. He had built this, the scholarship, the placement, the seat at the table, from a cardboard box of someone else's discarded study materials and 7 years of teaching himself in borrowed bedrooms in other people's houses. And now the man who had been afraid of his father's name for 2 seconds in a drill hall was going to take it all away. When Caleb showed up at Voss's office at exactly 1600 hours, he sat in the chair on the wrong side of the desk, hard, slightly too low, the kind of furniture that makes you feel small on purpose. And he listened to Commander Raymond Voss explain, in the careful, measured language of a man who has done this many times before, why Caleb's performance in the drill hall 2 days ago had raised serious concerns. Too precise, Voss said, too advanced, too far beyond what a cadet of your background and preparation could produce independently. No second year achieves that without a source, without assistance, without something he shouldn't have had. I didn't cheat, Caleb said. Then explain it, Voss said pleasantly, because I need an explanation that makes sense, and your father's ghost isn't an explanation. He slid a form across the desk. Formal misconduct review. 14 days to demonstrate genuine independent knowledge. If he couldn't, and Voss made clear, with the quiet confidence of a man holding all the institutional weight, that he believed Caleb couldn't, dismissal would follow. Permanent, public. Everything he had built, gone. I learned that method from my father's notes, and Caleb said. He attended this academy. He was a federal cadet. He worked on that exact scenario, and he solved it, and he wrote down every step. Something moved in Voss's face, a tightening around the jaw, a flicker behind the eyes that he controlled in under a second, but not fast enough. Your father's notes, Voss repeated. Yes. And where are these notes now? In my room. I've had them since I was 14. They were in a box at a foster placement. They weren't even addressed to me. They were just left behind. Voss was very still. Your father's name again? Marcus Reyes. The stillness became a different kind of stillness. The kind that has weight in it, pressure, the kind that a room fills with just before something breaks. I have never heard that name, Voss said. The words came out half a second too fast. He was here in 1993, Caleb said. Class of 93. He was a cadet in this department before he was expelled. The jaw tightened again. I said I don't know that name. Voss stood abruptly. The movement was too quick for a man who had been performing calm. This meeting is over. 14 days, Reyes. Withdraw now and save yourself the public record. That's my advice. Take it. He opened the door. Caleb stood. He held Voss's gaze across the length of the room. I didn't cheat, and I'm not withdrawing. Then you're a fool, Voss said. Just like... He stopped. The words died in his mouth like he'd bitten down on something. Just like who? Caleb asked. Get out of my office, Voss said. Caleb walked down that corridor and the two words followed him the whole way. Just like who? Voss had stopped himself, but not in time. Not before Caleb had heard the beginning of a sentence that told him everything he needed to know. Voss was not simply a bureaucrat protecting institutional reputation. He was a man protecting something personal, something that had to do with Marcus Reyes, something that had been buried so long that the sight of Marcus Reyes' son walking his scenario in 4 minutes had cracked it open at the surface. Caleb went back to his room. He sat with the box. He opened every notebook, every folded brief, every loose page of his father's handwriting, and he read through all of it again with new eyes. Not the eyes of a student learning tactics, but the eyes of a son looking for something he had missed. And near the back of the oldest notebook, he found a page where something had been torn away. Not accidentally, deliberately, cleanly, along the binding. Only a fragment remained at the edge. On that fragment, in his father's handwriting, one name was still legible. Voss. That night, Caleb called Diane Webb. She had been his foster system coordinator for 11 years, the one constant in a childhood defined by everything being temporary. She had shown up to every academic review. She had kept his box safe when he had nowhere to store it. She was the closest thing to family that he had. Diane, he said, I need to ask you about my father. Silence, long and careful. Why are you asking now, Caleb? He told her about the drill hall, about the scenario, about Voss's face when he said Marcus Reyes, about the email and the 14 days and the fragment of a page with one name on it. He heard her breathing change on the other end of the line. What is this commander's name? Raymond Voss. The silence after that was different from the previous silences. It had shape to it. Weight. The sound of someone deciding something they had been putting off for a very long time. Caleb, she said finally, and her voice was not steady. I need you to come to me this weekend. There are things I should have told you years ago. Things about your father. Things about that man. What things? Not on the phone, please. Just come. The call ended and Caleb sat in the dark of his room, his father's notebooks arranged around him in a half circle like a history he hadn't finished reading, and he understood, for the first time, clearly and completely, that the moment in that drill hall had not been a beginning. It had been a return. He drove 4 hours on a Saturday morning through rain-gray highways and arrived at Diane Webb's house in the early afternoon. She was waiting at the kitchen table. There was a cardboard box in front of her that Caleb recognized. He had seen it in her storage room every time he visited over the years, always tagged with his name in black marker, always in the same corner, never discussed. I kept this locked away because I thought it was protection, Diane said. I thought if you didn't know, you'd be safe. You'd move forward without the weight of it. Safe from what? She opened the box. Inside were letters, documents, and a photograph of a young man that Caleb had only ever seen in one other place. A small faded print that a caseworker had handed him at age 9 with the words, "This is all we have of him." The same jaw, the same eyes. His father, at 21 years old, standing in front of a building Caleb recognized now as the main entrance of the Whitfield Federal Law Enforcement Academy. Marcus Reyes had been there, had stood at that entrance with his whole future in front of him, and no reason yet to believe it wouldn't be his. Your father was a cadet at Whitfield in 1993, Diane said. He was gifted in a way that people noticed, the kind of gifted that makes you stand out even when you're trying not to. Everyone in his cohort knew he was going to do something that mattered. His training supervisor saw it too. She paused, and then his training supervisor took it. She pulled a letter from the box and placed it on the table. The paper was yellowed and soft at the folds. Dated March 1994. Dear Cadet Reyes, following a formal review of conduct and misrepresentation of field analysis materials, your enrollment at the Whitfield Federal Law Enforcement Academy is hereby terminated, effective immediately. At the bottom, a signature. Raymond Voss, Senior Training Commander. Caleb read it twice. His hands were not fully steady. Voss was his supervisor, he said. Yes, and your father had spent months developing something, a tactical framework, a solution to a command scenario that federal analysts had been studying for years without resolution. He called it the Callaway Protocol. He brought it to Voss for feedback, because that was the process. Cadets brought their significant work to their supervisors for review before it went to the department. Caleb was very still. Voss took it, he said, not a question. Voss presented it to the Federal Oversight Board as his own original methodology, published it under his own name, built his credibility, his career trajectory, his publication record, all of it resting on a framework that Marcus Reyes had developed and handed to him in good faith. Diane's voice was barely holding together. Una, when your father tried to fight back, when he filed a formal grievance and told the Academy what had happened, Voss accused him of fabricating materials, said Marcus had pieced together his notes from old classified documents and was trying to pass them off as original work. And the Academy believed Voss. He was a senior training commander with relationships throughout the oversight structure. Your father was a 21-year-old mixed-race cadet with no family in the department, no connections, no one to call. The investigation took 11 days. 11 days, Caleb. And at the end of it, Marcus was expelled and Voss received his first formal commendation for contribution to federal training methodology. She was crying now, quietly and steadily. Your father tried everything after that. He filed appeals. He wrote letters. He contacted a lawyer who told him the case was unwinnable without internal witnesses willing to come forward, and none of them did. He was blacklisted. No federal agency would touch him. He tried to move on, found work, built a life, and then you came along and for a while it seemed like maybe the forward motion was going to hold. She stopped. But the knowledge that his life's work had someone else's name on it, that he had been called a fraud for telling the truth, it followed him everywhere. It got heavier over time instead of lighter, and eventually the weight of it became more than he could carry. Caleb understood what she was not saying. His father had not simply died. He had been destroyed, slowly, methodically, by a system that had chosen the man with power over the man with the truth. And the destruction had followed him out of the academy and into the rest of his life until there was nothing left of the forward motion. He had been 24 years old. Caleb was sitting at the same kitchen table his father had never seen, holding the same notebooks his father had filled as a young man who believed the system could be trusted, and he was 20 years old. And the man who had done all of it was still standing at the front of a drill hall with 3 commendations on his wall, and the absolute confidence of a person who has never been held to account. Transfer, Diane said. Please, walk away from Whitfield. Let it go. You can finish your training somewhere else. Build your career somewhere he can't reach you. Caleb looked at the photograph of his father, 21 years old, full of something that Caleb recognized because he felt it in himself. A certainty that the work was real and the work was enough, and that if you were good enough and prepared enough and honest enough, the system would eventually have to acknowledge it. His father had believed that, and it had killed him. My father walked away, Caleb said, and it didn't protect him. It followed him out the door. He stood. I'm going to finish what he started, and I'm going to make Voss answer for every year of it. The 14 days that followed were the hardest of Caleb's life, and his life had not been short on hard. He filed his formal response to the misconduct review. The Oversight Board required independent verification, evidence, documented and externally validated, that his knowledge was genuine, self-developed, and consistent with materials that predated Voss's published work. 14 days to prove a 30-year-old crime in an institution that had already buried it once. The whispers started almost immediately. By the end of the first week, the story that had spread through Whitfield had reversed itself completely. What had begun as something that deserves to exist, the version where the quiet scholarship cadet had done something astonishing, had been replaced by the version that Voss needed to exist. That's the kid who cheated the scenario. Found something online, memorized it, waited for his moment. Scholarship fraud. You always find out eventually. Cadets who had applauded in that drill hall now had a different story to tell at meals. His study partners stopped responding to messages. An instructor who had praised his written work 3 weeks ago returned his last assignment without comment. The warehouse where he worked weekends reduced his shifts. The manager said only that he was planning ahead, but the implication was clear enough. Caleb felt the pressure of it. He would be dishonest if he claimed otherwise. Every system he had ever lived inside had eventually organized itself against him. The schools that lost his records when he transferred, the placements that ended without explanation, the processes designed by people who had not considered the possibility of someone like him needing to use them. He knew what it felt like when an institution turned its machinery toward removing you. He had been removed from places before, but those had been places that were never really his to begin with. Whitfield was different. His father had been here. His father's work was still here, in a framework on Voss's wall with someone else's name on it. This time, walking away was not an option. He spent his nights in his room with his father's materials spread across the desk, working methodically, dating every page, cross-referencing every formula and decision tree and tactical notation with the dates on Voss's published presentations. The correspondence was complete and damning. Every core element of what Voss had published in 1994 appeared, documented and developed, in Marcus Reyes's handwritten notes from 1992 and 1993. Not similar. Not inspired by. Identical in structure and sequence, with the kind of specific unconventional logic that couldn't have been independently arrived at twice. Marcus had come first. The evidence was real, but Caleb understood, with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who had watched institutions protect themselves his entire life, that evidence alone was not going to be enough. Not against a man with 30 years of federal relationships and a department that had already chosen him once. He needed someone inside the system, someone with standing, someone whose credibility Voss couldn't simply dismiss. He opened the Whitfield staff directory late on a Thursday night and scrolled through it slowly, looking for a name that meant something. And he found one. Dr. Anita Solis, Associate Professor of Behavioral Command Theory, a former federal field officer, 16 years of service before she moved into academia. She had joined the Whitfield faculty 6 years ago, and in those 6 years, she had built a reputation for being the person on staff who said what others in the department had decided it was safer not to say. She had challenged 2 policy decisions in writing in the past 3 years. She had co-authored a report on cadet evaluation bias that had gone to the Federal Training Oversight Board and been cited in 2 subsequent policy reviews. She was not a person who played the game the way the game expected to be played. Caleb wrote to her at 5:48 in the morning when the campus was quiet and the decision felt less risky than it would have in daylight. Dr. Solis, my name is Caleb Reyes. You don't know me. Commander Voss is filing a misconduct review against me, and I believe I have evidence that he has been hiding something for 30 years. Something involving my father, Marcus Reyes, who was a cadet at this academy in 1993. I believe you may be my only remaining option. He hit send and sat in the silence of his room and waited for a response that might not come. Dr. Anita Solis was 44 years old and had spent 16 years in federal service learning exactly which battles cost too much and which ones cost you more if you walked away from them. She was careful. She was patient. She was strategic in a way that had kept her credible in a system that was not always comfortable with people like her being credible. And she had been carrying a specific piece of the past for 30 years. The piece that began in 1993. In a training cohort she had watched closely because it contained the most naturally gifted tactical mind she had encountered in her entire career. She had watched Marcus Reyes develop the Callaway Protocol over 8 months. She had heard him talk through it in study sessions. She had seen him bring it to Voss. And 3 weeks later, she had watched Voss present it to the Federal Oversight Board as his own original contribution to law enforcement training methodology, with his name on the title page and no other name anywhere. She had been 22 years old. She had told herself she had too much to lose. She had told herself that no one would believe her over Voss. She had built her career carefully and kept her mouth closed and watched Voss receive commendations for work that was not his. And every year the silence had cost her something she couldn't name, but could feel every time she passed his door in the Whitfield faculty wing. She read Caleb's email 3 times. Then she sat for a long while at her desk, and she made a decision that was 30 years overdue. Her office was small and full of books, and she had a single photograph on her desk. A group of cadets at a federal training exercise from 1993, young and unguarded, caught in a moment before the world had fully revealed itself to them. Second from the right in the photograph, grinning with the confidence of someone who knows he is good at something extraordinary. Marcus Reyes. She had kept that photograph for 30 years. She had never been able to explain to herself exactly why. "Sit down," she said when Caleb came through her door. "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Do not leave anything out." He spoke for 25 minutes. She did not interrupt once. When he finished, she pointed to the photograph. "Second from the right," she said. "That is your father, Marcus Reyes. We were in the same training cohort, 1993. He was the most gifted tactical analyst I have ever worked alongside, and I watched Voss take everything from him and say nothing. I have carried that for 30 years. The room was very quiet for a moment. "You were there," Caleb said. "You saw it happen." "I saw all of it," she said, "and I am done staying quiet." She had spent 2 days in the Whitfield archives after receiving his email. She had gone through 30-year-old departmental records, research proposal submissions, key internal correspondence, things that Voss had apparently believed were buried deeply enough that they would never be relevant again. She had been wrong to assume he was right. The first document she placed on the desk between them was a formal research proposal submitted by Cadet Marcus Reyes to the Whitfield Training Department in November 1992. It described in full technical detail the command framework that Raymond Voss had presented to the Federal Oversight Board 14 months later as his own original contribution. Marcus's name was on the header. Marcus's signature was at the bottom. The date was 14 months before Voss's presentation. The second document was a formal grievance filing submitted by Marcus Reyes in February 1994, alleging that his training supervisor had misappropriated his research. And at the bottom, dismissed. Insufficient grounds. Matter closed. His father had tried. He had done everything right, filed the paperwork, followed the process, named the specific conduct and the specific evidence. And the institution had closed the file in under a week and handed Voss a commendation shortly after. "He did everything he was supposed to do," Caleb said quietly. "He did," Dr. Solis said, "and the institution chose the man with the title." She leaned forward. "But here is what is different now. You have his original materials. If we can establish their authenticity through external validation, someone whose credentials the Oversight Board cannot reasonably dismiss, Voss's position collapses. Not just the charge against you, all of it." She picked up her phone. "I know someone. Walter Hines, retired federal deputy director. 38 years of service. He wrote the national standards for command training evaluation that are still in use today. If he convenes an independent panel and validates your abilities directly, no oversight board in the federal system can ignore his finding. Will he do it? I don't know. He's 73. He turned down 3 external requests this year alone." She was already dialing. "But for a chance to correct something 30 years old, he may say yes." The call lasted 4 minutes. Caleb could hear Hines's voice as a low register through the phone, but could not make out words, only tone. And at some point the tone shifted, and Solis closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, something that had been tightly held for a long time had released. "Walter Hines is convening a review panel," she said when the call ended. "However, 3 evaluators, independent, off-campus, neutral location. You have 48 hours to prepare." Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "There is one complication," Solis said, and her voice was careful. "One of the 3 panelists is a former Whitfield graduate, class of 1994. He was in your father's cohort. He was there when it happened. Friend or threat?" "I genuinely do not know," she said. "He may be the most important witness we have, or he may have spent 30 years protecting his own silence and have no intention of breaking it now." November 10th, 0900 hours, a conference facility off campus. Neutral ground chosen by Hines to ensure no institutional pressure could settle on the room. 3 evaluators at a long table, Caleb alone on the opposite side. Deputy Director Walter Hines, 73, retired. The kind of authority that doesn't need a title attached to it because it exists in the way a person carries themselves, quietly, absolutely, without apology. Commander Priya Nakamura, 52, Department of Justice Crisis Response, known in federal training circles for a precision that made career politicians uncomfortable and a record of findings that had never once been successfully challenged. And Captain Dennis Farrow, 60, retired federal field commander. Whitfield class of 1994, the man who had been in Marcus Reyes's cohort in 1993, whose face, when Caleb walked into that room, went the color of chalk. Hines spoke first. Cadet Reyes, this panel has one purpose. One, we are here to determine whether your abilities are genuine, whether you solved that scenario through authentic knowledge or through materials you had no right to use. We have no institutional stake in the outcome. We are here for the truth, nothing else. Understood, Caleb said. Then begin. The evaluation was in 3 parts. The first was a live command scenario, multi-agency, simultaneous decision points, a level of complexity consistent with graduate training, far above anything a second-year cadet was expected to handle. Caleb picked up his pen, and for one moment he was completely still, the full weight of what was at rest in this room pressing down on his shoulders. His own future, his father's name, 30 years of a truth that had been buried and had now somehow survived long enough to reach this table. He thought of his father's handwriting, the sentence he had read 100 times in the margins of the oldest notebook. The situation doesn't change. Only your response to it does. His hand moved. The first scenario took 38 minutes to complete. The standard expected time was 90 minutes. Commander Nakamura made a note without looking up from the page. The second scenario involved multi-jurisdictional protocol under a compromised chain of command. More layered, more demanding, the kind of problem that requires a structural understanding of how authority actually flows rather than how it is supposed to flow on paper. Caleb used an approach that appeared in none of the standard Whitfield materials, an approach he had absorbed from his father's notes at the age of 16 and internalized so completely that it came to him the way his own breathing came to him. Not as a technique retrieved, but as a way of seeing. 51 minutes. Hines leaned forward. The third element was open-ended. No correct answer. No framework to match against. Just the full quality of a mind applied to a problem under pressure, and 3 experienced evaluators watching to see what that quality actually was. Caleb closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He thought of his father at 21, sitting at a desk somewhere in this institution, filling those notebooks with ideas that no one would credit him for. He thought about what it means to do the work anyway. He opened his eyes and wrote without stopping for 1 hour and 12 minutes. Or 3 hours and 9 minutes total. He set down his pen. The panelists collected his materials and conferred in voices too low for him to hear. He waited in the corridor. Dr. Solis sat beside him in silence. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Then the door opened and it was Dennis Farrow who stepped out, alone. And he looked at Caleb the way a man looks when he has been carrying something for so long that the weight of it has become part of how he holds himself, and now he is about to put it down. "I need to speak with you privately," Farrow said. "Just you." Solis looked at Caleb. He nodded. He followed Farrow to the far end of the corridor. Farrow stood with his back against the wall and did not meet Caleb's eyes. "I knew your father," he said. "I know. We were in the same cohort, 1993. I worked alongside him for 8 months. I watched him develop the Callaway Protocol from a rough idea into something complete and extraordinary. I was in the room when he presented the outline to Voss. I was in the room 3 weeks later when Voss presented it to the Oversight Board as his own." Caleb was very still. "You said nothing," he said. "Not an accusation. A fact." "I said nothing," Farrow said. His voice was not steady. "None of us did. We were 22 years old and Voss had the power to end our careers before they started, and we were afraid, and we told ourselves it wasn't our decision to make." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father filed his grievance, and we all let the institution bury it. I have not spoken his name to another person in 30 years. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a sworn statement. Everything I witnessed, or every conversation I remember, the specific dates, the specific conduct, everything I should have put in writing in 1994 and didn't." Caleb took the envelope. His hands were trembling and he let them. "Why now?" Farrow looked at him fully for the first time. His eyes were red at the edges. "Because I watched you in that room today. You approach problems the same way he did. The same lateral logic, the same willingness to find the solution that isn't in the textbook because the textbook isn't always right. You have his gift, Caleb, and I watched a room full of evaluators recognize it, the same way I recognized it in your father 30 years ago. And I realized that I cannot be the same person twice. He straightened. I'm changing my panel assessment, and I am prepared to testify formally against Raymond Voss. The door opened. Hines stepped into the corridor. Cadet Reyes, we're ready. Caleb walked back into the room. Dr. Solis stood at the back. Farrow took his seat with the other panelists. Hines held the evaluation materials across the table. In 38 years of federal service and training oversight, I have assessed officers from every major academy in this country. I have reviewed thousands of evaluations. I have seen genuine ability, and I have seen fraud, and I know the difference with a clarity that does not waver. He paused. Your work today is exceptional, not adequate, not above average. Exceptional. Scenario 1, completed in less than half the standard time using methodology I have not encountered in any published training curriculum. Scenario 2, while your approach to the jurisdictional protocol reflects a structural understanding of federal command authority that most active field officers take years to develop. Scenario 3, the quality of reasoning demonstrated is consistent with professional-level tactical thinking, not cadet-level preparation. He set the papers down. It is the conclusion of this panel that you are not a fraud. You are a genuinely gifted officer in development. The misconduct accusation filed against you is baseless. Nakamura. Agreed. Farrow stood. And I am prepared to provide sworn testimony regarding events I personally witnessed in 1993 and 1994. Testimony that directly and specifically implicates Commander Raymond Voss in the misappropriation of another cadet's original research and the deliberate destruction of that cadet's career. Hines looked at Caleb for a long moment. Your father, he said quietly, deserved better than what this institution gave him. So do you. November 14th, 0900 hours. The Whitfield Academy Formal Oversight Hearing Room. Cold, formal, built to remind everyone present of the weight of institutional authority. Voss arrived looking exactly as he always looked, composed, unhurried, carrying the ease of a man for whom rooms like this have always worked out. He had been through oversight processes before. He knew how they moved. Sure, he knew the language. He had spent 30 years learning how to sit across from scrutiny and let it pass over him. He did not know that this time the scrutiny had evidence. Voss spoke first because he always spoke first, because the man who sets the terms of a conversation often determines its outcome. The matter, he said, was straightforward. A second-year cadet with no verified independent training background had produced analysis far in excess of his documented preparation. He had refused to provide an adequate account of its origin. The only reasonable conclusion, Voss said, was misrepresentation. He took no pleasure in the finding, but the institution had standards, and those standards had to be maintained. And that was, in the end, all this was about. He folded his hands. He waited. The oversight chair turned to Caleb. I didn't cheat, Caleb said. I couldn't have, because the methodology I used in that drill hall came directly from my father's materials, documented in his own handwriting in November 1992. More than 14 months before Commander Voss presented the same framework to the Federal Oversight Board as his own original contribution. Voss's composure registered the first hairline fracture. Those materials could have been, then explain this. Dr. Solis placed the first document on the table. The November 1992 research proposal, Marcus Reyes' name on the header. Marcus Reyes' signature at the bottom. The full Callaway protocol, developed and documented, 14 months before Voss's publication. She placed the second document beside it, the February 1994 grievance filing, Marcus Reyes' name again, the specific allegation, plus the specific evidence cited, dismissed in 7 days. She produced the independent panel report, Hines, Nakamura, and Farrow, their findings documented and signed, unanimous in conclusion, and then she placed Farrow's sworn statement on the table, face up, and slid it across until it rested directly in front of the oversight chair. Captain Dennis Farrow was a Whitfield cadet in 1993 and 1994. He was a direct witness to the development of the Callaway Protocol by Marcus Reyes. He was present when Voss received the framework from Marcus for supervisory review. He was present at the Oversight Board presentation, where Voss introduced it as his own original work. His sworn statement documents all of it in specific detail, with dates and corroborating circumstances. He is prepared to testify in person. Voss stood abruptly. Farrow is... Sit down, Commander Voss. The oversight chair's voice landed like a command. Voss sat. Caleb stepped forward. My father was 21 years old when Raymond Voss decided that his work was more valuable than his future. He was accused of stealing his own research. Work he had developed over 8 months, work he had brought to his supervisor in good faith. Work that was taken from him and published under someone else's name and used to build a career that now has 30 years of institutional protection behind it. He kept his voice level. He had practiced keeping it level because he knew that the moment it cracked would be the moment the room remembered he was 20 years old and not his father. When Marcus Reyes tried to fight back, the institution chose the man with the title. No real investigation, no fair hearing, and 11 days and a dismissal notice. My father was expelled. He was blacklisted. He spent the rest of his short life trying to carry the weight of being called a fraud for telling the truth, and it killed him. He looked directly at Voss, not with hatred, with something steadier and more permanent than hatred. And now, 30 years later, the same man tried to do the same thing to me, because I walked into his drill hall, because I knew something he hadn't expected me to know, because he could not allow the son of Marcus Reyes to stand in front of 40 witnesses and demonstrate that what he stole was real. The room was completely still. The video testimony from Walter Hines played on the screen at the front of the room. Hines looked directly into the camera with the undivided authority of a man who has nothing to prove and no one to protect but the truth. I have reviewed Caleb Reyes' work extensively. His abilities are consistent with the materials documented in his father's original notebooks. Those materials predate Professor Voss's published work by more than a year. It is my professional opinion, based on 38 years of federal service and training evaluation, that Raymond Voss has built his professional reputation on research he did not produce, and his accusation against Caleb Reyes is not a good faith conduct concern. It is an attempt to silence a witness. The screen went dark. The hearing chair looked at Voss. Commander, is there anything you would like to say? Voss opened his mouth. He was still, Caleb could see. We're trying to find the version of this moment where the language worked the way it always had, where the authority held, where the institution remembered what side it was supposed to be on. He found nothing. He closed his mouth. The misconduct charge against Cadet Caleb Reyes, the chair said, is dismissed effective immediately. A full investigation into Commander Raymond Voss is hereby opened, covering allegations of research misappropriation, fraudulent attribution, and systematic abuse of supervisory authority spanning 3 decades. Before the hearing adjourned, Caleb asked to speak one final time. I didn't come here for revenge, he said. I came here for my father's name. He set Marcus's oldest notebook on the table in front of the oversight panel. Marcus Reyes was 21 years old when everything was taken from him. When he was brilliant, and he was prepared, and he did everything right. And it wasn't enough because the system was not designed to protect people like him from people like the man sitting across this room. He looked at the notebook, the worn cover, the tight, careful handwriting, the margins filled with a mind that had never gotten to show the world what it was fully capable of. He deserved to be remembered for what he actually was. Not a cautionary tale, not a footnote, a federal training innovator who developed a framework that is still in use today, in a curriculum that carries someone else's name on it. That changes today. He stepped back. That is all I came here to do. The investigation that followed took 4 months. It was conducted by an external team with no prior Whitfield affiliation, at the specific instruction of the Federal Oversight Board. What they found was not a single incident. It was a pattern, documented and consistent across 3 decades of Voss's career, involving research absorbed from junior cadets, evaluations manipulated to serve his purposes, and a deliberate system of identifying and removing cadets whose presence he found threatening before they could become credible enough to challenge him. 4 additional cases of research misappropriation were confirmed. 2 former cadets came forward with accounts so similar in their specifics that the review team noted they appeared to describe a practiced method rather than isolated conduct. Voss's tenure was not accepted as resignation. It was stripped formally by a unanimous vote of the Federal Training Oversight Board. His publication record was reviewed. The Callaway Protocol and 2 other frameworks subsequently found to have originated with junior cadets were formally reattributed. His commendations were reviewed. His name was removed from the Whitfield Hall of Achievement, where a plaque in his honor had hung for 11 years. He was not simply fired. He was erased from the institution he had run as a kingdom for 9 years. The last that Caleb heard, Voss was consulting for a small private security firm in another state, at a fraction of his former salary, in a role that required him to answer to people who would never have been permitted to speak to him at Whitfield. He had spent 30 years making others invisible. He had become the one nobody wanted to see. The Whitfield Federal Law Enforcement Academy formally credited Marcus Reyes as the originator of the Callaway Protocol in a statement issued jointly with the Federal Training Oversight Board. The statement acknowledged the 1993 development of the framework, the 1994 misattribution, and the institutional failure that had allowed the misattribution to stand unchallenged for 30 years. It was, as formal acknowledgments go, understated. It was also 30 years late, but it was there. His name was on it. Marcus Reyes, class of 1993. Origin, Callaway Protocol. A scholarship was established in his name, the Marcus Reyes Academy Scholarship, designated specifically for first-generation applicants, for cadets from the foster system, for young men and women entering federal service without family connections inside the department, and for the ones the system had been designed to overlook. Caleb was named its first formal advocate. In the spring of the following year, he published his first formal case analysis, an expansion of his father's original framework, updated for the modern multi-agency environment, drawing on developments in behavioral command theory that Marcus Reyes had never had the chance to see. The dedication read, "For Marcus Reyes, who solved this first? Who deserved to have his name on it? Who taught me, across 30 years and through pages I nearly never found, that the situation does not change. Only your response to it does." Dr. Anita Solis was appointed to the Whitfield Independent Review Board the following year, the first woman of color to hold the position. She accepted it without ceremony and got to work immediately, which was consistent with everything she had ever done. Captain Dennis Farrow donated 3 consecutive years of his retirement income to the Marcus Reyes Scholarship. He did not call it penance publicly. In a private letter to Caleb, he did. He wrote that he hoped it was not too late for such things to mean something. Caleb wrote back and told him it wasn't. He meant it. The Whitfield Academy restructured its cadet grievance process entirely in the 18 months following the investigation. No more closed-door reviews conducted by the accused party's departmental peers. No more holiday schedule hearings designed to limit advocacy access. Mandatory independent panels for any accusation above a threshold severity. Anonymous reporting infrastructure. Documented response timelines with external oversight at each stage. So 2 other federal training academies adopted substantially similar protocols within the following year, both citing the Reyes case in their implementation documentation. 1 cadet, 1 drill hall, 1 father's buried truth, and a system that would never again be able to say it didn't know. A year after the hearing, Caleb stood at the front of Drill Hall B, not as a cadet, as a junior instructor, the youngest in Whitfield's history, appointed on the strength of a performance record and a published case analysis that had drawn more attention from the federal training community than most senior faculty generated in a decade. Same room where Voss had tried to make him disappear. Same concrete floor, same boards at the front. Entirely different air. He ran his sessions differently than Voss had run his. He didn't use silence as a weapon. He didn't design public moments of humiliation and call them standards. He asked questions that were hard because they were meant to build something, not break it. And at the back of the room in the far corner, nearest the exit, because some habits are older than any single room, a young man sat alone. Quiet, head slightly down, mixed background from his file, foster system graduate, scholarship recipient, strong marks carefully managed to stay just below the threshold where they might attract the wrong kind of attention. Caleb recognized all of it. He recognized it the way you recognize something you used to be. After the session, when the other cadets had filed out, he walked to the back of the room and sat on the edge of the desk nearest the young man's chair. "Your analysis on the third scenario last week," Caleb said, "what the approach you used for the jurisdictional conflict? Where did you develop that?" The young man looked up slowly, with the particular wariness of someone who has learned that being noticed is usually the beginning of something bad. "I worked it out on my own. I wasn't sure if it was right." "It was better than right," Caleb said. "It was original. There's a difference." He set a worn notebook on the desk between them. The cover was soft at the edges. The first page read, "M. Reyes, Federal Academy, Class of 1993. "This helped me," Caleb said, "when the whole system felt like it was organized against me. Keep it as long as you need it." The young man looked at the notebook, then at Caleb. "Why?" Caleb stood. "Because someone always sees," he said. "Oh, the question is whether they use it against you or they hand you something and say, 'You're real. What you carry is real. Don't let anyone tell you different.'" He walked to the front of the room. The young man opened the notebook to the first page, and somewhere in that quiet, something that Marcus Reyes had started 30 years ago continued forward. Here is what this story is really about. It is not about law enforcement. It is not about tactical frameworks or evaluation scores or the procedural mechanics of a federal oversight hearing. It is about what happens when a system built to protect the powerful is used against the people it was supposed to serve. Raymond Voss looked at Caleb Reyes and saw everything he had spent 30 years being certain didn't belong in the rooms he controlled. A young man with no family name in the department, no connections, no legacy, someone the system had already processed as temporary before he ever arrived. He did not see a son. He did not see a 21-year-old father's notebooks carried through 7 foster placements and 6 years of self-teaching. He did not see someone who had been solving the problem he thought was unsolvable since he was 14 years old. He saw a target, and that is the specific blindness of a person who has held power so long that they have stopped being able to imagine they could be wrong about it. Voss learned what that blindness costs. 30 years of stolen work, 30 years of institutional armor. All of it undone in 4 minutes and 11 seconds by a cadet he had already decided didn't belong. Maybe someone has looked at you that way, decided before you opened your mouth that you were temporary, a checkbox, a placeholder for someone more deserving who hadn't shown up yet. Maybe they used their authority to make the process work against you, scheduled your hearing on a holiday, removed your allies from the room, replaced your record with their version of it, and let the institution choose their version, because the institution had always chosen them before. Maybe you are still in that back row, still carrying something no one has officially credited you with, still waiting for the moment when what you carry gets to be seen for what it actually is. Here is what I want you to know. What you carry does not stop being real because someone powerful refused to acknowledge it. The work your father did, or your mother, or your grandmother, or whoever poured something into you before the world got difficult, that does not disappear because an institution buried the name attached to it. It lives in you. It comes out of you in the way you see problems, in the way you approach what everyone else says is impossible, in the 4 minutes and 11 seconds when the room goes quiet and realizes it had you wrong from the beginning. Keep going. Keep going when the process is rigged against you. Keep going when the allies go silent. Keep going when the whispers replace the applause. Keep going because the alternative is not peace. It is just a different kind of cost. When your moment comes, and it will come, show them who you are. Make them learn the hard way exactly who they were dealing with all along. Have you ever had a Voss in your life? Someone who used their authority to take credit for what was yours, or to make you feel that your background disqualified you before your ability ever had a chance to speak? Have you ever carried someone else's unfinished work? A parent's sacrifice, a family's buried truth, something that shaped everything you became without ever receiving its proper name? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what you carry. Tell me who handed you something in a box and said, keep going, even when they couldn't stay to see where you went. The most powerful stories may become future episodes on this channel. And if this moved you, if it reminded you of your own fight, to your own back row, your own 4 minutes and 11 seconds waiting to happen, share it. Share it with someone who is still invisible. Someone who is still holding a notebook with someone else's name on the cover, waiting to understand what it means. Subscribe to Dynasty of Heart Stories, because legacy does not die just because someone tried to bury it. And remember this, a commander did not know that the foster kid in the back row of his drill hall was carrying 30 years of stolen genius. He handed him an impossible scenario and told him to prove why kids like him don't belong. 4 minutes and 11 seconds later, he learned exactly who he was dealing with. The hard way. This has been Dynasty of Heart Stories. Stay just. This story should not be the exception. It should be the last time it ever happens. At Dynasty of Heart Stories, we turn one moment of injustice into a call for change. Subscribe, then, and help make that call louder and longer lasting.